Hey, before we get into this episode, I just wanted to drop a comment. We're going to be talking to Mark Zschech, and he's got this assignment to speak into and to help 4 billion lives on Earth, which is amazing, and you're going to love it. But one thing you'll notice about this episode is the footage is not great. Mark's is great, but on my side, where we've got team, a studio, and lots of equipment, on this episode, the footage does not look great. But here's the lesson. It doesn't matter from time to time. The content is still really, really valuable. And here's what I'd love you to catch. It is process over perfection. There will be times when it's not great, and I'm happy to put this out to show you that it can sometimes not be great. But the process of continually putting out content and being consistent is what wins. So if I'm not going to get hung up with my content, you shouldn't get hung up with yours. All right, let's get to the episode. Well, guys, welcome back to the podcast. This episode is going to be fantastic. I've got Mark Zschech with me today, who has got a phenomenal story. And one of the things I like to do to these podcasts, I want to bring people with a slightly different perspective. And what Mark's got, as we'll uncover on this episode, is an interesting dynamic where he is the senior pastor or a senior pastor of a significant church on the east coast of Australia, but by choice has decided to go and build a phenomenal business and a significant business making a really big impact at the same time. So I wanted to bring that to you because it's a different perspective to either pure minister, if you like, and a pure entrepreneur. And we're going to weave those two together. And I think you're going to find that any division between sacred and secular is going to get smashed here as Mark blends these two together. All right, so strap in. This one is going to be amazing. Hey, Mark, why don't you tell the people on our stream today, who is Mark Zschech?
Oh, that's a very awkward question to open with, and no one typically wants to talk about themselves, but I'll skirt around the edges and I'll let you fill in the gap or poke or prod if you want to go a little bit deeper. But look, I'm in my late 50s, three beautiful kids, 2 of them are married, 5 grandkids, 1 expectant in the next few months, married to Darlene, who's a well-known global worship leader, and that's been an interesting journey in itself, to live with somebody who is world famous. That'll test your sense of identity and ego and all those sorts of things, while still trying to be true to yourself and make your own mark. As you said, Wes, Darlene and I lead a church called Hope You See. We have 6 campuses here in Australia, right in this particular region, the Central Coast, Hunter, Port Stephens, and then we have 3 affiliated churches in America, and then 4 churches in India, of all places. And so that's pretty well represents our life as well, how it's gone over the last few decades.
Nashville, I heard you got a campus there in Nashville.
We have a campus in Nashville, which is it's in a suburb called Thompson Station. I've been there a number of times, which is just sort of outside of Franklin. So even though it's, people refer to it as Nashville, it's not sort of in downtown Nashville as such, but they're doing amazing things. Dustin and Gina Smith lead that church, and they're doing an incredible job. And that region has been a hotbed of churches. Unfortunately, quite a few failures as well. So we're trying to do something a little bit different there and build a real community-based church in that area, and they're doing a fantastic job.
Do you like country music?
Do I like country music? Well, I like Keith Urban. I don't know whether that qualifies.
Nope. Nope.
I wouldn't say I love country music, but I've got a good friend of mine, a lady called Jane Denham, who actually is quite successful in the country music scene here in Australia. She's but I like her music as well.
Well, just for the record, I love country music. So if we ever have a business event in Nashville, I'll be the first one to be there. All right. So I want to explore first off this choice to be bivocational, right? So you've got this thriving church, 6 campuses and growing, because you stumbled on when you said 6. So there must be more in the pipeline. I picked that up. And then you've got this thriving media company with big headcount and big projects and working for clients that we would all know here in Australia. Take me back to the decision you made to be bi-vocational. When did you make that? Did it come out of revelation? What happened for you to choose to intentionally do that?
Well, look, it was a struggle. I have to be just brutally frank. And when I was having these challenges, I'll call them challenges, about what to do ministry or do business. I'd never even heard of the term bivocational. I didn't even understand what that meant, because I'd always been taught and read in a lot of the readings, you got to stay focused. You got to do the one thing. You got to build your life towards this thing. And so to some degree, I always felt guilty whenever I was doing ministry, which I loved, working full-time, by the way, in a church system or something like that. I loved it. But at the same time, there was always a hankering for trying to do something else. So what happened is several times in my life, I flipped and I flopped. So I worked in a marketing career, which I loved. And then I thought, no, I want to become a pastor. I want to do ministry. I quit and I went to work at a church. My first go, I lasted about a year. And then I was like, this is not for me. This is not what I thought it would be. So I quit working at the church and I went back into the marketplace. I did that for another big, long stretch. And pretty much, I felt like the Holy Spirit nudged me and say, Mark, you need to go and work at the church again. And I was like, okay. So during that time, by the way, I'd had a career working for large international corporates, in marketing and sales. In the meantime, Darlene and I started a motorcycle parts company on the side. That was which now has a term. That's now, what do they call that? A side gig.
Side hustle, yeah.
Side hustle, sorry. Yes, I'm still learning all the phrases, the new phrases. We had a side hustle, which we had a couple of full-time employees in that business. And eventually I finished working for that international company and then went to work for myself in that business where we imported parts from Japan and Europe and sold them into motorbike shops in Australia, and also did some manufacturing locally as well. It was a whole lot of fun. But again, I got to a point where I was like, I love working for myself. I love working for my own business. There's a pathway for our whole family here. But again, I just felt compelled to work at a church. Like I said, I felt like the Holy Spirit nudged me to say, give the business away and go and work at the church, which was crazy at the time. And there was a particular friend of ours that found himself in a particular predicament. And so he needed something. So we gifted him the business and I went to work back at the church again. On the very first day of working at the church, they held an all-day prayer meeting. And so I went to the office and I sat there, and by about halfway through the day, I was like, God, what did you do? Why am I here? This isn't what I expected. I thought I could work on the ministry, and here we are spending all day sitting on our backsides praying. Not that prayer is a bad thing, and that it's a very effective thing, but I just didn't feel like that's what I could do, bring the best. So to be honest, I then worked at the church a long time, but I had all of these sort of energy and frustrations in the inside of me, dreams and ideas for businesses. I'd give them away. I'd say, you should do this. This is a good business. And so, gave lots of those things away. And funny enough, what happened was I was at a particular conference. The guest speaker was a guy called TD Jakes. And something happened. He spoke and was being interviewed, and he said, the person interviewing him says, oh, so you're a pastor, you're a film producer, you're an author, you're a property developer. And the question was asked, yeah, I get all that you do all of those things, but what's your calling? What's the one thing that you're called to? And he says, I'm not going to answer that question. He says, I'm called to all of those. And it honestly set something free on the inside of me. And I went, oh my goodness, I could do both. I could do ministry and, be in the marketplace all at the same time. And nothing changed physically for me in that sense, but it freed something up on the inside that really allowed me to be where we are today, which is, as you said, we're really proud of building a great company that's got a whole bunch of people and doing all sorts of, I'm not saying it's because I'm doing it, because I'm not there much, but that we've got this business that really is missional in its true sense, but at the same time, it's a for-profit company. At the same time, still being just as jazzed and excited about building a local community-based church.
Oh, hey, I hope you're enjoying this week's episode. Listen, I'm just here training a group here in this room, but I need you to subscribe to my channel. Guys, do you think they should subscribe to the channel? Yeah! Guys, please subscribe. What your story cracks open for me is this concept that actually this is not about tasks. It's about identity. And like the way that I've said it in the past is I'm a full-time minister that finds myself doing X. So because you're not a minister with one hat and not a minister with another, and the reason why you can't be is because you can't be a part-time Christian, right? You can be a full-time Christian or you can be zero, but you can't be part-time, and so the role of minister, it just looks different, right? That's the beauty of this revelation, is that you can be a minister on Monday pastoring somebody in the congregation and helping them through some challenges. You can be a minister on Tuesday in the boardroom with your team of 30 casting some vision on, doing an acquisition or something. Like, same anointing, same function, but kind of different environment. And
I don't feel confused.
No.
Other people say to me, how do you do it? How do you separate everything in your mind? I went, well, that's probably, you don't quite understand, because I'm not separating anything.
There's nothing to separate.
That's all in one.
I'm a minister when I'm talking to my daughters.
Yep.
I'm a minister when I'm at the office.
Yeah.
I'm a minister when I'm spending time with them all. I'm a minister when I go to church and help out.
Yeah. Look, to help, because I know that there was a whole generation of Bible teaching that was portrayed in many churches around the world, which was there's kings and there's priests.
Yeah.
And I get that, the logic to that theology, but basically what pastors did is they said, you're either one of the other. And I suppose I want to put it on the record and say, you can be both. Yeah. I don't know that everyone's called to be bivocational. That to me is still something that's got a big question mark over it. Is that a calling for everyone to be bivocational? I can't say strongly yes or no to that. But I do, because even on our church team, you could imagine then, if we're Darlene and I the lead pastors, then there may be the expectation that everyone should be bivocational. Yeah. And in my experience, that's not been the case, is that some do understand that revelation and have a calling for that, where others are just called to be a priest. And I also support that and acknowledge that.
It's about 4% of the body of Christ that are called permanently, like funded by the vocational church. Yeah. And there's 96% who will be bivocational to some degree, whether it's run my own business or work in a job or raise children, or, they're still going to have to delineate. But I guess that the bit that I really wanted to draw out from you in this conversation was that you don't see them as separate. So if there's a single parent, let's say mum raising some children and then goes to church on Sunday, she's not a different person in those two locations. A business owner that happens to sit on the board of a church doesn't see them as two hats. It's one person that brings their anointing, gifting, talents to different realms depending on where they find themselves.
Look, my job, I feel, is to help. If you really study Ephesians, when it talks about the body of Christ, it was a revelation to me when we started leading this church, is that every joint supplies. So that means there's just not some that do the leading or some that do the work and others just get dragged along. Every joint supplies. So my job, I've got to provide leadership and vision and all these sorts of things. But at the same time, I think my primary job as the pastor is actually to release the vision that's in those people. and figure out how that joins into us as a community of faith. So if they're an entrepreneur, a businessman, well, then my job is to go, how do I support, undergird, release, teach, train, bring spiritual principles into their endeavors. Other people are called to be school teachers, homemakers, whatever. Well, then again, how do I help support them be the best that they can be? And if I can do that, well, then we are building, I believe, a church that Jesus would be proud about.
And I think you guys do that incredibly well. As an onlooker, like I'm not a member of your church, I've spoken there, but you guys validate the call to business in an incredible way. And you've built an infrastructure with Dave Balestri, who we've had on the podcast in the past, like him being there to kind of lean into the business people, which I think is just a phenomenal investment that you've done.
Oh, he's a gifted apostolic leader in his own right. But Darlene and I are very proud of the fact that, he's decided to follow us and our leadership in our church. But it just goes to show the quality of the individual. And I think also the calling that's on his life, which is obviously in the prophetic, but not only the prophetic, but the marketplace. And so again, to have a champion like him building our, center of excellence, which is all about coaching marketplace people, how to be spiritual in their roles. Because again, you just don't become less spiritual as you walk out of the church building and then go, well, now I've got to think about commerce. I've got to think about paying bills, selling things. Actually, you can bring your spirituality into all of those places. So he's a champion.
Yeah, I just think you need to go and talk to him about his shoes and maybe deliver him a little bit from that demonic obsession that he's got. His feet are too big for those shoes that he wears.
He gets healthy persecution within the Hope You See.
Okay. Well, I'm hoping to bring some unhealthy persecution to him, just to try and rebuke that evil spirit. But if you don't know what we're talking about, and just go and Google Dave Balestri from social media, and you'll see he puts a photo up of his insanely long feet and terrible shoes on a regular basis. So, hey, I want you to take me back to early years of Christian TV, because you were there. You were one of the pioneers. I hear stories about, you kind of being on the ground with early music pioneer in Australia, with TV, because I think you were buying airtime off Channel 7 or 9, one of our major TVs, putting Christian content early in the morning. Take me back to those eras. Who was it? Who were the global superstars that you were running shows for, and what were those years like?
Yeah, well, that's a big story, and a long journey, because globally, if I put, because I know where most of your audience are based, but in Australia, globally, Australia had a very anti-Christian culture inside secular television. So to place a Christian program on one of the free-to-air channels was, I would say, impossible. You had, some embedded issues like our programs, I should say, like Hour of Power, they'd been there forever. But that was because of a friend and a handshake and all these sorts of things. So to actually place a program on Australian television was difficult. Channel 9, Channel 7, typically what they did in the early days was they said, to get rid of all of these irritating Christians that want to put programs on TV, and part of the Australian Code of Practice at the time was we have to allocate some airtime for Christian programs. And this was in the old days, they called it Christian Television Australia, or CTA, where that was divvied up, some airtime amongst all the channels. They would also then throw you a bone and give you a little bit of production time. And then there was obviously the political race trying to merge every denomination into about 3 time slots a year. And so I was part of that. I was on the board for CTA for many, many years, trying to wrestle that, trying to get more time, trying to get more help, trying to resolve the church pull and push in all those spaces, which wasn't easy. But we did some good things, and eventually we've sort of found a good groove for ourselves, which was around the Easter and Christmas specials and doing some things around that. And that was a lot of fun, and I think we had a lot of impact. But again, of course, larger churches, bigger ministries rightly wanted to put their mark in that space. So long story is that I believe it was a God connection. Is there was a retired gentleman, a Jewish man that worked for Conrad Black. For some people that may not mean much. He's a guy that's probably he's been in and out of jail since then. But he was at the time the largest. He was the Rupert Murdoch of the day. He owned more TV stations around the world than any other single individual or corporation. And their CEO was a fellow, that David, who retired from the company. But of course, a guy like David Mintz, he couldn't sit on his hands, so he went and started a business. He knew there was an opportunity of trying to place Christian programs on secular programs, which had some impact in the US in those years, and they were definitely ramping up to some degree in Europe, zero in Asia, and typically there would be the one or two exceptions in Australia, but there was no open doors for that. And so David helped me, to be honest. He was in his 80s at the time, and he knew that I was trying to help, one or two different churches trying to get on television in Australia. He said, "Look, Mark, I'll draft you through." And so he did. And so we cracked the door open, and we got one program on at like 5 o'clock in the morning on a Sunday on Network 10. And basically over the years, we've been able to inch that forward and move that forward. David unfortunately passed away and handed his business to his nephew, who him and I are very good friends as well. So that's how really the doors open. It is a very small world. In those days, I think I counted, there was about 16 different people that made the decisions for, people like us for the whole world. And so my job was to try and get to know those 16 people and find out what the issues were, try to figure out how we could break those doors open, which we did, which I'm very, very proud about. And that we ended up, to some degree, becoming the gatekeepers of what programs would be seen in Australia and what wouldn't be. So what some people would not be aware of is the programs that we didn't allow to come on the air in Australia, and so try to be some sort of quality about that as well.
Yeah, nice. So you and I share a love for media. Obviously, that's the company you run, and that's what I'm doing here, and have done for a long time. You were telling me off air just before we started about the change that's happened to you since COVID. Pre-COVID, television guy. That's why I wanted to kind of start with that question. And you were telling me it was 28-minute slots, 58-minute slots, like ad breaks, like you had that down pat. And now over the last 2 years, maybe a slight change in perspective for you. So kind of talk into that for us. What do you think the landscape is 2022, 23, 24 from a media perspective?
Look, it's been an internal dialogue, in some cases argument, between us and our clients and observers and industry pundits saying, TV's dead. It's all online. And, we've been having that conversation for a decade. But the funny thing is that, what age gives you is a little bit of perspective, because, if you go back 20, 30 years ago, there was issues back then when we talked about, as Australians, we know, and we have 5 terrestrial television stations, and the rest are, of satellite or cable or streaming services. But again, when cable TV was about to come, which was having massive impact in America at the time, everyone thought free-to-air television's dead. It's all gone. Everyone's going to be watching cable TV. Kiss all of that goodbye. Well, of course, it didn't go goodbye. Actually, it increased its reach. Cable TV in Australia, or satellite, I should say, it only reaches 36% of TV households in Australia. That's crazy. I mean, that's low in my books. That's why those brands have struggled. They've really struggled and had to reinvent themselves. So perspective gives you the idea that I always come back to this thought that, people say content is king. The new phrase is context is everything, all these different catch cries. Let's come back to, at the end of the day, people want to consume content. How they receive it is always just the vehicle. And sometimes people get fixated on the vehicles rather than actually worrying about what the content does. Now, I do believe still the idea that you can't just make amazing content and not consider the distribution, because that in media terms is part of the formula. You can't have one without the other. You've got to have good content, you've got to have good distribution. And for those that have sat in any of our presentations, we always have a third leg of that table, which is you better be thinking about how you respond, or how you communicate, or how you build an audience, because these days those three things are super important: content, distribution, and connection is what we call them. So those are very, very important. If you're not doing one of those three, I can't understand how you could succeed or have influence, is probably a better way to put it. So television, in my view, now you're trying to back me into a corner here to say that TV's dead and online is everything. I'm not going to subscribe to that, because globally, India has a viewing audience of 1.2 billion eyeballs every day. It's a huge television market. It's probably the largest television market in the world. Bollywood as an industry now actually has more GDP than Hollywood as such. So people are missing. There's a shift going on about where the economics are lying. If you watch between the lines now, that once I say this, you'll start to see it. When you're watching Hollywood films now, you'll start to see a nod to Indian culture. It'll be songs, dress, food, all sorts of things, because that is the big marketplace for television, and that's where things are going. So yes, I've always been a believer. I still think our company was built around 4B Media, was built around media is a missionary tool. It can impact the world. It comes back, people ask me, why did you come up with that name 4B? Again, if you can indulge me for a second, there was a book, an academic textbook written by a guy called Dr. Prackland out of Harvard. And he wrote a book and had a theology and a logic around how to serve the poor. How do we get people out of poverty? At that time, the global population was 6 billion. I mean, he said 4 billion of those live at the bottom of the pyramid. But he went through marketplace businesses that shifted and changed their logic about how to not just how they can add those 4 billion as consumers of their products. And he went through Unilever, shampoo, quite a number of companies. It's a fantastic book. So we said, as a media company, we're going to go after the 4 billion people. And so that's why we called our company 4B Media. So that's a side note. You asked me another question. I'll finish in a second here. COVID, I believe, has changed everything, is in the sense that people locked in their homes every day, and obviously streaming has come along pre all of this, and now we're at this sort of crossover point where I think some of these streaming platforms are really going to outstrip television, because most formats, television-wise, are built around a 28-minute, 30-second formula, or in a 58-minute in the 1 hour that gives a couple of minutes for ads and station bumpers and IDs and all those things. But the consumers, you and me, we're changing our habits. And of course, I'm going to say something very obvious, but when we all go to watch a streaming show, nobody watch a 28-minute, 30 show. They watch an hour or 2 or 3 episodes or whatever it is. They consume much more content. Well, of course, television can't necessarily deliver that. And of course, in particular, YouTube as a platform, I just think that has got a lot of opportunity in it. I mean, some people, I've heard comments saying, oh, it's reached its peak. I'm going, are you crazy? It hasn't even scratched the surface, because once everyone starts to, it becomes ubiquitous, that everything you do will be, I think, something like, look, there may be, I just don't want to speak it up too strongly, because you know, in the old days, we do remember MySpace. Well, of course, that disappeared. So, of course, there could be another whole platform that comes in behind YouTube. So YouTube's not the answer, but the way people are consuming content has changed for sure. So yes, I'm now adding to my bow the idea that these other platforms, I think, are significant and people should consider them. The challenge, of course, is that you know, people might find it hard to squeeze into or bring their content into those platforms. And so what they naturally do, they isolate themselves and say, well, I'll build my own platform. Thank you very much. Because then I can control everything. But of course, it's the same old logic. You know, you could build this $1 million website, but no one's going to pass through and click on your website. You've got to be in the middle of it all. And that's my only encouragement to people. That's why I think free-to-air TV is still the most significant mission tool on planet Earth.
Yeah, and I think it's crazy to throw the baby out with the bathwater, right? Because they said the same thing when radio was dying. Well, it's still here today, right? Now, praise God, we don't use like the Telegram. Like we've moved. There are some communication tools that we don't use anymore. But interestingly, you said it's about the content distribution and how you respond. I don't know that it's ever been different.
No, absolutely not.
You know, like you go back to the days of the wireless, there was probably content that was poorly produced, and so no one listened. And or they put it on the wrong channel at the wrong time and no one, or they went one-way communication and never built any kind of community, right? Like it's never been any different. I just think today, the beauty of 2022 is that we still got to produce good content. We've got to find distribution, and you mentioned YouTube, and there's others. If there is something coming, and I think it's a long way off because it's never as fast as we think, but the virtual reality world will take YouTube kind of experience to a whole new level because you can probably attend a conference from your desk instead of just watching one-dimensional TV. And then how you respond. Here's the good news. I don't think it's been easier though. I think now is the easiest time in history through all that iteration to produce content, get distribution, and respond and engage with the community. Now is the greatest era so far.
Well, look, the cost of entry is ridiculously low.
Well, I wanted to ask you that because you've been around from the beginning. So if I go back to those early days of Christian television, are you able to give me a number? What would it cost to produce an episode? 50 grand, 100 grand, 100, like have you got a number that goes, an episode would cost you something like this much money?
Well, rather than the cost, because that, you know, you're talking about labor costs there as well, but let me talk about equipment. That's probably the best way, because everyone knows now how they can edit or how they can film or all these things. You know, back in the, whatever it was, the early 90s, it would have been early 90s, the cost to buy an edit suite. Well, I remember buying the very first, what they call non-linear edit suite, which means you weren't using tape machines necessarily. You were editing on a computer. The product was called a Media 100. I paid 75,000 Australian dollars in 1992. That same technology you could buy for $2,000 today. And even then you still had to hang a broadcast quality tape machine. I bought a secondhand, what they call Betacam SP tape machine, which is, you put one big cassette in it. That cost us $25,000, that tape machine. Again, now you put that on a thumbnail, on a hard drive, you know, to buy what they call the 3-chip camera, which means I had 3 computer chips in it, which means the quality was remarkable. Now you look back and go, oh, that's shocking. Again, that they were close to $50,000 to buy that camera.
And now they're on here.
So the entry is ridiculously low.
And I think that's the bit that I really want to make sure people hear. And because you've got the story, I don't have that story. You've got that story. I've arrived at a time when it was already incredibly affordable, right? But I think people take for granted the era that they find themselves in. You know, like I'm in a studio here. It's primitive, but it produces this show on a weekly basis. And if I was to do a quick count up, we're probably like 30 grand's worth of equipment. Like, and that's not an episode. That's the equipment that we use every single week to pump out show after show after show after show.
Yeah, that's right. Which is, I would have, when I was 20 something, I would have dreamed of those days.
Yeah.
Now, kids are coming out of their HSC with serious editing and production skills, which I love. We at our company, we found ourselves a bit short of, reasonably skilled staff. So we actually built a media school. So we've got a program now which we call Learn and Earn. You come and do your diploma of screen and media. You work for us for a year. After that, leave or stay, I don't mind, but you'll get paid wages in the middle of it, just to try to get a lot more, Christian orientated people in the media industry. That's our goal.
Yeah.
So we are a missionary. We call them, we're building media missionaries. So that's part of our strategy.
If you have somebody come through your school and they would prefer to live somewhere warmer than where you are, you could always send them up here. We would happily take them.
We're more than happy about that.
You said something at the start of the call that I want to go back to because I think it's really interesting. Your wife, Darlene, is obviously a global singer, has done a wonderful job. It's funny. I'm sure most people have a Darlene story, but I got saved in a Uniting Church in 2004. And so all we did was sing hymns, and I thought that was it for the rest of my life until some young person gave me 2 CDs, and she was the lead on both of them, and I had no idea who Darlene was. But in fact, they were CDs that I put them in a Walkman. This is how far back we're going, with the headphones that had the metal bar over the top, and I went to bed listening to her singing worship songs for the first 12 months of being a Christian every night. Like one way, and it's cool for me that here we are, however many years later, I'm talking to you, and made a phenomenal impact. And I still go back to those albums all these years later because they were just such a wonderful experience. And so, but what you said was really interesting. You're the husband of a global superstar in the faith, and you mentioned rationalizing your ego and your identity, and I don't want to skip over that. So can we just go back there for a minute? What was that like for you? Because it'd be very easy to be in the shadows, but at the same time, you're your own man with your own skills, gifts, calling, assignment. How did you walk that line together with Darlene?
Look, I mentioned it because I know it's a tipping point for a conversation, but the reality is it's been really easy. I love her. I want the best for her. And it's obvious when you're in her presence and you listening to her lead worship on a platform or something, there's something special. There's an anointing, a calling, a gift, and you go, let's just set that free. But of course, when your partner, your spouse, or your becomes successful, so what do you do then? Because then that can make you feel inadequate. It can make you feel shallow, or I'm an underachiever, or do I then give myself to just serve her? Well, I think that's a shortcut as well. I just don't think that's how God has us designed. And so it was a wrestle, but only for a short season, to be honest, about how are we going to make this work? Because I've got things I feel like I need to do. At the same time, acknowledging that there's something unique, special, international on her life. And so to wrestle all that together, it wasn't that hard, but I mention it because I think, couples sometimes get tangled in this area. They go, well, it's his business, his ministry, and they start to separate things out. And I just don't know that it should work that way, where we just threw ourselves in deep. So, I was on the tour buses. I was the one, organizing T-shirts and booking hotel rooms and getting everything sorted. So I just thought, well, better go with this, and yet at the same time, I'm still dreaming, thinking, planning, actually even activating some of the business things I'm doing or some of the ministry I was doing with media. I just thought that's who's God called me. It was, I worked hard, I'll tell you that, to manage all of those, but I love our journey, and I love how we've done it. I think it's really is a gift from God, and we don't take that lightly. And that influence that's still for Darlene is significant all around the world.
Yeah.
Only just a number of years ago, she was invited by the Pope to come and lead worship on the steps of the Vatican with a full orchestra, with Andre Bocelli singing, and
I remember.
And it was just powerful. It was powerful, and I just go, "Wow, God!" There's 80,000 plus people in St. Peter's Square there. What a significant opportunity to impact, the Catholic Church, obviously, and the globe, because that was televised everywhere. So I'm proud of it. And it's done a lot of good in me, I tell you that. But it's made me really fine tune. Who am I? What am I good at? What should I let go? And what should I fight for? That's what it's done.
And that's what I love, because in that you had to figure out who you were. See, I think it would have been very easy for some people to almost just become subservient, right? And just be like, I'll maybe even there's an element of laziness in that. That's just like, I'll just do this. But it would have been just as easy to possibly been competitive.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right, and then be vying for who's pulling each other down the most, right, to get to the top. But what you've been able to do in that is basically go, no, like we'll support each other, but we'll also chase our individual things, and there's not a pecking order, right? And I think that's a beautiful thing, because the reason why I'm talking about this with you is there's a lot of listeners who are business people who their partners maybe don't support them 100%. Some do and some don't, right? And it's something I get told a lot. I tell you what's interesting. A lot of female entrepreneurs don't get support from their husbands.
And that's why I always sort of say that line to some degree, because I want to challenge people about that, and just to sort of go, look, you're not a smaller man because you serve your wife. Quite the opposite, actually. Yeah. I think, Darlene says it, I'll quote her, but, it's a bit awkward me saying it. She says, it takes a big man to, serve a successful woman. Yeah. And I do agree with that. And I think that, look, I learned a lot about me in the middle of all that as well. And so, I could, as a kid growing up, I was intimidated by success. I grew up in a small little, working class town.
Bundamba,
there you go. Bundamba Primary School, Bundamba High School, Bundamba TAFE. And so I didn't know anyone that went to university. There was no sense of aspiration or whatever. And so when those sorts of worlds opened up to us, like I said to you, I was intimidated. Well, Darlene helped me with that, is that she could walk into the room and not be overawed. And I learnt then as well on that journey that successful people are just people. And so I'm very comfortable now in all sorts of rooms and spaces. And I credit her for that she's helped me with that. And so again, guys, I would just challenge you that if your wife wants to, look, if she wants to be an artist, if she wants to be a songwriter or whatever, it doesn't take anything away from you if you give yourself to help your spouse. And it works both ways. But I know it's an issue for some.
I checked a bunch of your recent sermons, because you do preach at your church. I don't know how regularly, but I kind of skipped through and saw a few. And there's a recurring theme amongst your messages. I don't know whether it's intentional or not, but you've spent a lot of time recently talking about legacy and generations and thinking generationally. What's going on for you there?
Well, it's definitely the theme for our church in this season of time, but it definitely is. There's some subjects I think that when you start diving into them, it just like comes alive. And so for me personally, that subject really resonated, and it comes back to, I'll tell you the point that in my life that it changed is that, like I said to you, I didn't grow up in I didn't get any heads up from our family or whatever. And I'm not complaining about that, but more to the point was, Darlene and I found ourselves in a place where we were really financially tight. It was survival. And I remember hearing a message where some I was in a service sitting in a pew, and someone preached saying, "You better be doing something for your kids and your grandkids." And we looked at each other and went, "We can't even think about that. We're just trying to make ends meet." At that time I had a side hustle. Now I'm using the correct language, where I was selling kites, flying kites on the weekends. I would import them from Hawaii, a box at a time, and I'd go down to Bondi Beach and I'd fly my kite, and then someone would say, "That's cool." And then I go, "Would you like to buy one?" And I say, "Here, hold these handles." And they go, "Yes, how much are they?" And I'd be selling my kites and I'd sell them and get another one. And that was my side hustle. I thought, this is some sort of way of trying to do something. So I felt the nudge of the Holy Spirit saying, "Mark, you've got to do something that's actually going to improve your kids and your grandkids' life. That's otherwise you're going to be in the same cycle that you are now. They're not going to be advantaged in any way, either with life lessons or economics or whatever." Because this was the 17% interest rate season in Australia at the time. So I thought about it a lot. And so the only answer I could figure out at that particular time was I went and bought the biggest life insurance policy that we could reasonably afford at the time. Just a life cover. That's all I did. Nothing else. And to me, it was the beginning of the legacy story for our family. And I said to Darlene, we've put something in motion today as a legacy. And so legacy, oftentimes people focus on what they receive, what inheritance they get. That can obviously be money, land, whatever. It could also be just, books or a set of china set. Darlene got gifted a set of china from her grandparents. And I said, "Well, that's not going to help us pay the mortgage." And so anyway, we laughed about it. So, oftentimes people think about what they get. In some cases, hopefully people think about what they can leave behind. But I think the more important legacy story for all of us is, what do you set in motion? And again, that day I bought that life insurance. I set something in motion. Obviously, there was going to be some benefit, hopefully, for our grandkids. It mightn't have been many dollars in the top, relatively speaking, but it was something. And again, I keep teaching our kids, our grandkids now, like, for example, at birthdays, I don't give them gifts. Darlene always buys them a gift, but I don't give them gifts. I put money into their stock trading account, which they all must have.
Love it.
That's what I do. And we're putting things in motion here. So again, helping them think differently. These are things that I just didn't understand as a 19-year-old. Yeah. I didn't even know about the stock market. Yeah. And so I'm just trying to say that's what legacy is about. And it's not just about money. It's about a way of thinking. Obviously, Rich Dad, Poor Dad, that was a big transformational change back in the day. And there's been many others. I particularly got a lot of value out of reading Zig Ziglar, See You at the Top. I still think that's a profound book about changing the way you think, and about what you set in motion is so important.
So I want you to weave that into the small business owners, the business owners that are listening to this, right? So you've got that story where you've caught that revelation and you put something in motion. Listening to this right now, they could be driving, running on a treadmill, whatever, just chilling out. We'd get a mix. We've got people that listen to the show that do 100 million a year, and we've got people that literally are about to start a business. What would you say to that spectrum of people in terms of taking their legacy a bit more seriously and thinking more generationally?
There's a guy that I loved his writings. He's not a popular writer, but I loved it. He wrote a series of books. I can't even remember his name, but it really impacted me. I had a chance once. He's from Texas. I went to America, went to Texas, went to meet him. And off the back of that, he built a school that he was teaching his particular business acumen in. And I'm going, man, this is a serious buildings, and he goes, yes, I built them so that they would still be here in 500 years. and he was quite an elderly guy. He was in his 70s then, and it just definitely helped put another brick in that wall to go, as a Christian. I just think sometimes there's a the culture has been, Christ is returning soon. And so we don't make long-term plans. We make short to medium-term plans. We don't make long-term plans. So again, I just think no matter where you are on that journey, the $100 million business, the $10 million, 1 million, or you're just starting, is don't just think about this year or this decade. Think about make decisions that actually go, I'm setting something in motion that I will probably never bear the benefit of. When you do that, we're talking then fundamentally about health. You're making healthy decisions versus just trying to make something happen. Healthy decisions win every single time, in my experience. And so I've done them. I've made mistakes. I've had businesses and they haven't done well and all these things. And, we're trying to push and shove and all that. But if you can just peel back and say, because, business is all about making decisions. What's the healthiest thing I can do right now for this business, for me? So I come back to then you'll start that legacy pathway. And I often think about, I've got a dream. I had a dream a long time ago when I made that life insurance decision. I went, I'm going to start a family bank. Because I was sick of the 17% interest rates. So it's taken me a long time, but we're now in the point now where our children and our grandchildren, we not on anything significant, not houses or anything like that, but if they wanted to buy a car or whatever, they come to the family bank, and the family bank pays interest. They have to pay interest on the loan, but again, keeping that capital, that interest cycling down through our generation, that's amazing. Wow. I think what I've set in motion now is hopefully in the generations to come in our family unit, that they will be advantaged in a way. It's very difficult to pass wealth past 3 generations, almost impossible. Very few people can do it, and I want to be one of those few.
Love it. So we basically just heard from Pastor Mark then. So we've had entrepreneur Mark, we've had Pastor Mark, we've had husband Mark, we've had father Mark, and yet he's the same person. He just gets to kind of live in those different worlds and dance between all of his skills and talents and gifts and anointings and things like that, which I think is wonderful. The final question that I ask Mark for everybody is, how is the kingdom advancing because of Mark Zschech's life?
It's pretty simple. We're trying to build a strong, local, healthy church. That's what Jesus said he was going to come back for. To me, the church is the answer. Trying to get people to encounter their life and follow Jesus Christ. Our vision statement is follow Jesus and your tomorrow will be greater than today. And that's what we're about. But I genuinely believe in the depth and the strength of a strong, healthy, I had that caveat, healthy community of faith. If you're not in a community of faith, I would question how far and how long you can go. I just don't know that you can do that on your own. And so as difficult, and I genuinely understand that, as difficult as it can be to be in a community of faith, I just highly encourage you to. It's going to cost you something. It's going to cost you some time, energy, surrendering, sacrifice, all those things. But the outcomes far outweigh the cost. Love and it. So to me, the best thing I can do is advance Jesus Church.
Love it. If somebody wanted to find out more about you, I know you're not really big on the social media thing, so maybe the Center of Excellence or the church, what's a URL that somebody can look you up on?
Look, our church website is very simple, hopeuc.com. hopeuc.com. On there, from a marketplace perspective, definitely the Centre of Excellence, I'd highly encourage. We've got a number of courses there that I believe you can do online or in person. That would, if any of these subjects has really stirred something in you, that'd be a great tool to add to your life. There's so many great resources. I know, Wes, you are a great asset to the kingdom and to this topic. I really appreciate your stand and your commitment to this mission. So well done to you.
Thanks. Well, guys, you heard it there. That's Mark's story, and I just think there are some real fundamental keys in there that you'll be able to draw from. What were the things that jumped out to you? I want those comments, in the comment section below. I literally want you to think, okay, what was the one thing that popped for you? And then I want you to put it in the comments, and I'll engage with you there. That gives me the feedback loop on where you're getting your value from these episodes. Mark, thanks so much for your time. You're such a blessing, not only to the Central Coast, but obviously, to the global footprint that you've got with the business and with the church. And we're really grateful that you've given us your time today.
Thanks, mate. Bless you. Thank you.
All right, guys, we'll see you for next week's episode.